there was a lot of fear and trepidation in a lot of it, and I didn't have a clue what I was even in for, honestly.
And probably there's nobody more surprised than us that we've been here for 30 years, That's
Yeah.
a surprise.
Yep, that's for sure.
When I was really little, I did feel God's hand in my life. And for whatever reason, I think I was burdened for the church, even from a young age. And going through my own rebellion in high school, I didn't have a lot of appreciation for the church, but I still felt a burden for the church, and I didn't really understand it. I knew in my heart that this is what I needed to do. In fact, I think we got to a point, I was like 32 years old at the time, and I got to a point where I just felt like if I don't do this, I was in sin. I mean, it was that strong, it was that convicting, but on the other hand, I agonized because I didn't think anybody would ever choose me as a pastor or accept me as a pastor, so I didn't really kind of get on the bandwagon as far as that was concerned.
But you were encouraged by people, though.
Yeah.
When we were up at the Boys Ranch at the church we were at, he would speak when the pastor was gone sometimes, and there was these sweet little ladies there that told him, if you don't do this, you're not following the will of God.
But the thing is, when they said that to me, it was like only verifying what I already knew in my heart. We didn't know for sure what God was going to have us do. We knew that we wanted to plant a church for the simple, I knew that because I just figured, first of all, no one would choose me if they had a choice. So I figured we'll start, and nobody can talk about the pastor they used to have. They can now just deal with the pastor they have. It's the only pastor they have. And that's the way it's been for the last 30 years. We knew that should the time come for me to go into full-time ministry, that we wanted to plant somewhere. And we just kind of assumed that it would be up in Washington because we loved Washington so much. I know most people know this, but we actually hated Portland when we first moved down here. Of all the places we didn't want to live, it was here. I was leading worship at Calvary Chapel, Portland, while I was going to school. We were pretty involved in the church there. And one day, Kevin and Melinda Voss and another couple came up to us and asked us, well, would you consider the idea of maybe coming out to Clackamas and see if we could get a Calvary Chapel started? And so we thought about it, and first we were pretty resistant because I still have another semester of school to go. But we said we would do it, and so I talked to the church where I was worship leading, and they encouraged us to step out and go out there, and we did. Biggest surprise to me is that when we went to the Voss's home, that people kept coming. People came. That was a surprise.
And then more people every week.
And then they came back, and I just was kind of shocked by that because my biggest frustration in ministry has always been my own insecurity. And just realizing, knowing who I am and knowing my own vulnerabilities and weaknesses and stuff, I just figured, there's always that thing. If people come back, they want to come back. But I do remember when we started, it was like, Lord, if you're not in this, I want to know now. I want to face it. I want to deal with it. And I would just soon go on and do something else with the rest of my life. And that's kind of, I think, how we approached it in the beginning. It's like, if this isn't what you want from me, make it clear. Yeah. So I'm no longer dealing with this thing in my heart. And I wrestled in particular, of just saying, look, God, if you want this thing to not go, you take it, it's yours. And I had gotten that from my pastor. He always kind of installed that in us, that where God guides, he provides. And if people don't come back, I guess it's a pretty good sign that you're not supposed to be doing this. But it wasn't that way, and God chose to bless us from the beginning. So
I don't know. I think I was probably more on the home front side. Probably more, oh no, we're gonna have to leave student housing, which was really inexpensive, and we're looking at a huge hike in our rent, and how are we gonna feed our family and that kind of thing.
We were already dirt poor, so yes, we just figured.
We were very poor on food stamps, and so I just didn't know how all that was gonna look, and I think that was more, am I going to go back to work? How's that going to look, for us?
I thank God for Janet because not everybody has a wife like that who is willing to take those chances and to face those insecurities. And we had already spent 10 years by the time we went to Multnomah, moving here and there and doing everything. And it's because she was willing to do it with me. And we would never have done any of it. And so by the time we got to the church, it was just one more step. It's really hard to try to explain how God supplied for us because there were so many things that if I look back, I couldn't even explain it. And someone once said, if you can explain it, probably God didn't do it. But honestly, I don't know if I could explain how the Lord met all of our needs. And I remember when we signed our first lease on the building on 82nd Drive, they wanted way too much money. I mean, I didn't have, I never call myself a man of faith anyway, because I'm always sweating bullets pretty much in everything we do. So it seemed like a closed door. And all of a sudden, the school opened up for us to go to. And so I never wanted to do a school. I thought, schools are hard. You got to go pack up every week and you're only doing it on Sunday. And it just never was anything that I really cared for. And so I went back to the landlord of the original facility that we looked at and I offered him half price. And to my amazement, he said yes. Well, then I said, well, now that you're in a good mood, do you think that I could bring you down to I think it was like $1,200 a month? And he agreed. He said, well, as we go along, we'll kind of increase the rent. And here's the funny part. I didn't know where we're going to get the $1,200. We just figured somehow the Lord's going to do this. Now, to be fair, there was already a group of about 40 or 50 people who were really invested in what we were doing. And so we had been in a home for 3 months. And so when we started in the building, people started coming. And whatever reason, we always had just enough to pay the rent. But there was, for a while, we couldn't buy a piece of paper.
Well, we borrowed chairs for our first Sunday.
Jan and I had a PA system that we had already owned. And so we used that. At that time, we saw miraculous things. People drove in off the street saying, the Lord wants us to give you money. And they would bring checks in for the church. They didn't go to our church. The Lord just brought them to our church. And so we saw things like that where the Lord just made it very evident that we were to be here. And again, for a long time, we couldn't really buy a lot or do a lot, but we knew that God was meeting our needs. And it was doing the same thing on our family because we made very little, I think, when we started. And still, somehow, some way, God supplied for us. I heard whisper of a couple people talking about this building, this church that they were wanting to use for some other purpose. And so I had my ear perked and we ended up checking it out. And it was the little red church down there in 97th and Holgate area, in the Lentz area. We went down to look at it. It was a rundown church. They said, well, we'd love to rent it to you. And I thought I was surprised.
Yeah.
Not only was I surprised, but the rent was about 1/3 of what we had been paying. So, and then they said, and we'd love to cover for your utilities and
your garbage.
We thought, well, done, deal done.
We weren't sure what we were paying for.
So it was an exciting time because the people in the church, the place had so much work we had to do on it just to get it ready, but everybody just chipped in. We went down there.
One of the best memories probably is that during the summer it was so hot that even opening the windows and having fans on did not help. No air conditioning, but...
The one thing you could say is that it was never about the building. Some people say if you have the building, they'll come. That building was miserably uncomfortable. We had our folding chairs. We were crowded in. We could only fit 130 people in the sanctuary. So, and the front chairs, literally you had to put your feet on the stage. So that's how tight it was there. And it was hot and we had no air conditioning. We ended up getting some ceiling fans, but it didn't matter.
just felt exciting every time that you went to church. You know, we ended up having like 3 services, so it was just, there was a buzz in the air all the time. It was just super exciting. I loved having the hallelujah party with the kids. You know, that was really fun. I love being in the neighborhood, watching the neighborhood change. I mean, going from a lot of drug houses around us to really just cleaned up around the area and the neighborhood being thankful.
Seemed like everybody was excited. We had a group of men, we were teaching inductive Bible study, and I remember one time there might have been 80 to 100 guys that were showing up every Tuesday night to learn how to study the Bible.
There was a lot of women that were talked to Doug about, you know, I want to do a women's Bible study or a women's prayer time, and he would come home like every week like, oh, I had so-and-so ask me about this, I don't know what to do, and I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do because I'm not going to do it. So finally one Sunday I just said to him, I said, just send them to me and I'll figure it out. I kept saying I was going to wait until the Lord brought somebody. The Lord's going to bring somebody, raise somebody up to do women's ministry. They're going to come and do women's ministry. And after 5 years of praying about this, one day I realized it was me that God brought to do women's ministry. So now I'm like, you know, I really love these ladies. I can't imagine being anyplace else, and I think this is where God has me.
Okay, I just want to share another particular precious time, and that was the campouts. We rented out 8 spots at Metzler's for our church campout. And every year we started renting out more until as it grew, we eventually took the whole thing. And it became just a great time for our church. I mean, everybody loved being there. It was 3 or 4 days that we were out there together. Kids could run anywhere, do anything they wanted. And we'd always end up with a baptism on Sunday. And there was sometimes, I think, we would do 20 to 30 baptisms on a Sunday afternoon, and the water was freezing. And I remember just feeling numb, you know, and my legs for days aching because of that. But that was a really exciting time, I know, for all of our church looking back. You know, obviously I can have a burden for a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I can do everything. And so we prayed, and it seems like God just brought the right people along to fill in those gaps, who had a vision for those things, who had a calling to do those things, and they did it very well. It seemed like every time we brought somebody on staff, it just added that much more to the ministry. You know, Carla was just amazing with the kids from day one. You know, she just knew what she was doing, and it was a blessing to us. When we started the church, I just knew we had to search to find missionaries we could support. And we found some who were ministering over in China, and we just said, hey, we want to support you. They were like blown away. We don't even know who you are. And so we started supporting them, but as our church grew, people in our church started having an interest to go out into the mission field, and the Lord brought Ray and Rebecca into our sites. We blessed them, and we joined forces, and we kind of sent them out. Later on, we had Robbie and Becky who went off into the Philippines. And we had other people, Patrick and Dina.
Courtney and Jeff
in Cambodia. And then Paul going over to Germany.
Mike and Lisa and Emily and Miles up in the Congo.
Oh, Bill and Danielle, of course. But no, I just feel like I've always felt that if you're doing your ministry right, it should expand somehow. That it shouldn't be just yourself, that it should go off and you see other people raised up. And that has always been my heart anyway. I love seeing people flourish. I love seeing people grow up spiritually. I love seeing people take ownership in their own calling and then watching and seeing what God does with that.
I think there was definitely, there was growing pains, but I think for us, there was times for us that were hard too, you know, that we went through in our relationship, because you're starting a church, and I think the hardest thing for me is that Doug was so focused on starting the church and so involved in ministry that that I had felt secondary a lot. That was a hard balancing time for I think for me in some ways. Yeah, the Lord saw us through that.
Yeah, if I could go back and do anything different, it'd probably be to spend more time with my family. I knew what it was like to be a pastor's kid, and I understood what our kids would have to go through. I wanted them to, of all things, to see what is genuine in the church, knowing that there's parts of all of us that you could look at us and say, oh man, he needs help. But we wanted our kids to see what was real and what was genuine, and we didn't try to hide it from them. And I know that we are where we are totally because of God's mercy and his grace. And I pray if my kids have learned anything from watching us, it's watching that and knowing that we have required a lot of forgiveness from others. And we want to be forgiving.
I hope that they would remember that we loved people, what you said, unconditionally, and that we love Jesus.
Yeah.
If we could leave them with anything.
Yeah, that we wouldn't have left them with bitterness.
Yeah, no bitterness, but the love of Christ that we would desire for them.
We had a lot of hurts over the years, obviously. I think everybody in ministry does. Some of them were probably our own doing, and things that you do that you make your mistakes and you do all those things. And so there ends up being a lot of discouragements. And I've shared with everybody, in my mind, I've probably quit so many times just because I would get so feeling defeated and feeling down in myself, and I need to relieve this church of me, kind of a thing. And again, I thank God that he gives us each other, because Janet encouraged me in the time I was down, and I encouraged her when she was down.
Yeah.
And fortunately, there was very few times when we were both down. But I always had to wrestle with God. It's like, I think I made a commitment back in the beginning. It has to be God that brings me into this. It has to be him that takes me out. And I knew I couldn't just quit, because then what I would miss. And having said that, when I think of especially one season in our ministry about 15 years ago, I was so broken and so hurt. I just wanted to leave and run. The Lord just let me know, what are you going to do? You're going to disobey me and go off and do what you feel like you need to do because of you?
Yeah.
So I couldn't do that. I wanted to, but the Lord held us, and I thank God for it, because what we would have missed in these last 15 years had we just done what we felt like we were supposed to do. And God held on to us, and we knew that there was people who weren't for us, but we trusted God with what he called us to do, and we're just grateful, because that's what held us here.
On our own flesh, we would have been done a long time ago. But because God just put a burden and a burning, I think, in our hearts to minister, is why we've remained all these years. Because where else would we go? God wanted us to be there, and we knew he gave us a love and a desire to be there.
And then you go through a period of time where you're no longer scratching for every penny and you have money in the bank. And that's, for me, when the real test comes, because how am I going to handle this? How am I going to manage it? And am I still going to trust the Lord the way? For some reason, God seems to do his best work in us when we're really struggling and we're calling out to him. The question that comes to us is, how do you do when things are going well? The Lord was faithful, because he always brought something into my life which drove me back to my knees. And it was when I was on my knees and hurting and struggling that I always sensed the Lord's presence. And I knew that he was with us. And during those times, then I think we drew closer, obviously.
There's been a lot of great things. There were hard things in starting, a lot of fears that I had. We've had a lot of really great stuff go on, but I have to say, I have loved absolutely every single moment I've had with every single person who's come through, even the difficult ones, because I've learned more of who Jesus is. And, there's a lot of humbling I needed in my life, and to be more like Christ, I hope he does more in me as we go. But I've loved every moment I've been at Calvary Chapel Southeast.
Seeing some fruit,
Yeah.
being able to dedicate children, later baptize them, later marry them, and later dedicate their children. That has been the biggest joy of my life. We have all these people
right.
now that are our family. And some of the people in our church are like our children. We love them, or we're like grandparents, and we feel that kind of kindred spirit with so many of them, and we've known for so long. We have a number of people that have been in our church from the beginning.
Yeah, we do.
Which to me is shocking. Why would they stay here that long? I mean, I could understand maybe why we did. I don't know if I always understood why they did, but they still love us. And that is amazing. And it's interesting because even the newer people that come in, we feel that same kind of kindreds, even though we haven't known them as long.
Yeah.
I am grateful that, some people get resistant to new people coming into your church because they feel like, well, it'll change. And I really believe that churches should always change. And if we don't change, God will help us change. Sometimes in ways we wouldn't choose,
Yeah.
But it's really good because it does change the dynamic. And of all the people that have come into our lives over the years, man, what a treasure. As far as ministry is concerned, I don't know what we have ahead of us. I know right now that this is what we know the Lord has led us to do. And it kind of leaves us kind of excited because this is the way we were before we started all this. I think we obediently followed the Lord into ministry. And I think we're obediently obeying the Lord right now and leaving at this time and handing it off. That, by the way, is a great privilege for me because I always wanted to leave well. And I wanted to leave when the church was doing well. And we've gone through a really great season. I love our church. For us, it's like, okay, so now we're obeying the Lord and taking this step. And to be able to hand it over to a staff that I feel very confident in is what gave me the peace to do this. I feel like I'm leaving the church healthy.
Yes.
That's a good, satisfying feeling. That whole theme of keeping the main thing. I could only hope that Calvary Chapel sticks with that, because I know the pressures in our world right now are so huge. There's so much compromise that is being coming upon churches and pastors, and the pressures to compromise.
I'm praying they'll do a lot the same. I mean, not the same as like, oh, it's just the same, but to continuing to teach God's word first and love the people. To me, it's simple, and that all the rest that gets done, that's just bonus. Because when you teach the word and people grow and love the people are going to love each other, and you're going to find that you have what I feel like what we have now is people who love each other. We see the Word of God active and alive in people's lives because we watch them interact with other people. Things that we don't even know about, we find out later how they're caring for one another, and that is a healthy church. And I think that would be my hope, is that the sheep continue to reproduce. There's new believers coming in and receiving Christ, and they're loved well.
I hope it has many blessings ahead.
Yes.
That Ryan you would experience more than we've experienced, and that you would enjoy what God gives to you.